Israeli Jews do not want a religious Messiah, they want a secular one. Israeli elections and Messiah mania. Where is the Jewish Messiah? Oh, if out of Zion will come Israel's salvation. For all intents and purposes, President Trump is Israel's Messiah. He has done more for the Jewish people than any Jewish leader since David Ben-Gurion at its founding. If PM Netanyahu and him are such good friends, why can't he be more like Trump and just do what needs to be done? Instead, he keeps the status quo. If ever was a time to change it, now is the time. Everyone says, we can't change the status quo, it will start World War III. Well, President Trump has changed the status quo on Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, yet no World War III. So what are we waiting for? Oh, I forgot, the deal of the century. Nice try, Mr. Trump, but there is no deal for the Palestinians except one that involves the elimination of Israel. And because the current mess of the elections and Netanyahu's legal woes, Israelis are stuck not knowing what to do. Messiah mania. I am really getting frustrated. If you are a Christian or religious Jew, you are constantly told or led to think that the Moshiach, or Antichrist, take your pick, is coming at any moment. Every natural disaster, every skirmish or forceful rhetoric by world leaders is potentially a sign of either the war to end all wars, or the coming redemption as told in biblical prophecy. I am especially frustrated with a news outlet called Breaking Israel News. There is a journalist that his job is to write articles every day on an aspect of how biblical prophecy is unfolding in our times. I have nothing against him personally, he is sincere in his belief. But this just plays into this anticipation. And it's not just this one site. There are no shortage of rabbis that also contribute to this anticipation online with YouTube videos. I wanted to write this earlier this year before the first Israeli election when a prominent rabbi predicted that the Moshiach would appear before Purim. I thought, I don't know, maybe he knows something I don't. So I waited. No Messiah. Although, there seems to be several people out there who claim to be the Messiah. I will make a separate video on that later. Now the rabbis are saying that the Moshiach will appear as Israel heads into its third election. Again, I want to believe it, but there is always another sign, another prophecy around the corner if this one also doesn't materialize. It never ends. All this does is keep people frozen in suspense. So if everyone is stuck just waiting for someone else, no one is actually doing anything themselves. The Messiah could also be waiting. This is the brilliance of the New Testament. This is how the Romans kept control. That and also through brute force, and now the rabbis are joining in on it. I don't think it's on purpose. They are going by their own sages' commentary. So what happens when it is all proven false? It reflects on Rabbinic Judaism's own corruption. When even the rabbis don't have the answers, then the real Messiah will appear. Let's get back to reality. There can be no war of Gog and of Magog until no nations are allied with Israel. Ezekiel 38 states that this war will happen when Israel is at peace. As long as there are Palestinians, that can't happen. The Bible clearly states that God is doing this to show the world that God alone helps protect and save the Jewish people. Not with America's financial or military help, but only with God's help. So as long as America is allied with Israel, the end times have not yet arrived. So please stop making everything into Gog and Magog. The current American alliance may change after Trump is no longer in office, so my fear is what is yet to come. But you also have to see the reality of the current state of Israel. Israelis just had an election, and the results show they clearly do not want a religious government. They want a Jewish, right-leaning government, but a secular democratic one. So how can there be the Messiah if no one wants him? The Messiah you will get will be a secular Messiah, just like you got when the secular Zionists brought you back to your land. So why is it that religious Zionists or the ultra-Orthodox don't have enough power? There seems to be four segments to Israeli society: the socialist, Zionist secular democratic left, the center secular Zionist right, the religious right, and the Arab parties. The center right and religious right have the most combined votes, but they can't unite due to the secular, religious divide. People right now are focusing on the growing Arab bloc, and that is a valid concern, but I want to focus on the growing divide between the Jewish secular and religious because this is why we are in the position we are in today. Percentage-wise, there are more secular and traditional Jews than religious. For those who don't know, traditional Israelis are Jews who, although may not be religious in the sense of Orthodox Jews, they still follow the Jewish holidays and Shabbos with some level of observance. Secular Jews don't follow any level of observance. So my main contention is with the secular who are mainly concentrated in and around Tel Aviv, but are all over the country. This is a result of Israel's immigration laws, or law of return, where the qualifications are based on genealogy, or marriage rather than on individual merits of religious observance, except for converts, which, as a convert myself, I think is unfair and allows totally non-observant Jews to live here with no requirement to either convert or become observant. And with the only Jews left yet to make Aliyah to Israel are mostly from America, which is mostly secular and liberal, I don't see the demographic changing anytime soon. I think the immigration laws should be changed to allow only observant Jews in, but I don't see that happening. So that leads me to believe that the only way Israel will become more religious is not through demographics, but through repentance. What will it take for that to happen? Something major. It won't be until there's a major war with many Israeli casualties, that Israelis will want to turn back to God. My goal and hope is to get the people to repent before that happens, as in the Purim story, but looking at history I'm not very optimistic that will happen, unless it happens right after Yom Kippur. The sin of the spies. I have conflicting thoughts on this. On the one hand, the lessons from the Tanakh show that the Israelites' military campaigns were only as successful as how well people were obeying God's commandments. So today, that would mean a major amount of casualties. But then how do you explain Israel's success up to this point? The Israeli army is mostly secular from its founding, but God was surely with them, even if there were casualties. They were determined. They didn't think about what the international community thought. I feel like that is why our leaders today are hesitant to take a stand. They are also afraid of casualties, but are they justified, or simply lacking faith in God as the 10 spies were? Maybe that is why we are stuck in the status quo. The Messiah will be the one who will step up and not be afraid to confront our enemies, just as David did against Goliath, or Caleb and Joshua against the Canaanites. Will he be religious or secular? Only God knows. Israel has no choice but to wage war against her enemies. We are in this position now because our leaders do not have the courage to do what is truly needed to end the status quo that the secular Zionists got us into from the beginning of Israel's founding, namely, force out or subdue all our Arab enemies and found the nation on religious principles. Which brings me to the rabbis. Because they still see the state of Israel as quasi-illegitimate, the ultra-Orthodox leaders have chosen to take a backseat, and just like they did under Roman occupation, all they care about is getting along so long as they can receive money to study in their yeshivas. But this is wrong and will lead to their downfall. The government is not Roman, it's Jewish. Secular or not, they are back in their own land and they should fight for it just as the secular do. Learn the lessons from the First Temple's destruction. Secular Zionists need to realize that the original vision of Theodor Herzl has failed. Although I believe God used him for his purpose to enable Jews to come back to their land, it obviously has not ended anti-Semitism. It only followed them. Israelis love their land and will fight for it, but they must realize it is not by their might that they possess the land, but only through God's. They take for granted that they will be safe, that the IDF, and God, will protect them, so they feel they can do and act the same as they did in exile. Jews during the First Temple felt the same way, that they could act as the nations and as long as they made sacrifices they were fine. Except now your sacrifice is your own blood. You cannot have the land without God and Torah. This is not just in a book, it's literal history. How many times can you refuse to learn lessons so blatantly clear from your past? God commands everyone living in the land to be holy. The good of the community goes above the individual. Why? Because individual sin brings judgment upon the whole community. It allows sin to spread like a virus. Then the community dies. so each individual's actions has consequences whether you realize it or not. This is manifested in terror attacks and anti-Semitism. All Israelis are against terror attacks, but if you are not following God's laws, then you, Israelis, are contributing to your own suffering. Learn the lessons from the Second Temple's destruction. Nothing has changed in 2000 years. What destroyed the Second Temple? Baseless hatred. Everyone is talking about unity, but the ultra-Orthodox need to get over their anti-Zionist bias and join with the other religious parties on the right, namely the religious Zionists. But they can't even join all the ultra-Orthodox together, namely the Ashkenazi and Sephardi. The Zionists can't unite because some are secular and some are religious, plus some are liberal and some are conservative. These divisions are a continuation of this manifestation. So the ultra-Orthodox and religious Zionists need to be more involved to communicate these truths that I mentioned above to the rest of the country, and maybe work on changing the immigration laws. Instead, they either want to be politically correct and live and let live or just want to distance themselves from the non-religious. All Israelis, even the religious, need to realize that the only solution to unity is to unite under God, obeying His commandments. The solutions are not democratic. Democracy is failing all around the world. Israel and the Jewish people can use this to show the truth that there is only one way to live, and that is by God's laws, not man's.